So start off from where we left. We were starting the topic prioritizing requirements. Actually, we were talking about the guidelines for working requirements and documenting and why documenting of the solution requirement is required. That was all we were discussing, and we were at the topic of prioritizing the requirement. Now, prioritizing the requirement is not a very huge topic. The tools we use here, we already have been discussing earlier at various places. So this is not something really very new. Anyways, how requirements are prioritized should be fully defined in the business analysis plan, which we have already created in section 3, business analysis planning, that discusses the criteria that the project team may use to prioritize the product requirement. So we do have the prioritized requirements. I mean, not the prioritized requirements, but we have uh, created a framework. How will we prioritize the requirement? This is now the time when we will apply that and we will prioritize the requirements. The business analysis work is in requirement elicitation and analysis is performed to use one or more prioritization techniques in order to facilitate priority decisions from the key stakeholders. So what are those techniques? We have already talked about them. We will talk more about it. The key stakeholders here are those stakeholders who have the authority to prioritize the requirements as specified during the planning. So these are selected stakeholders. Talking about the prioritization schemes, there are several methods to evoke prioritization of requirements from the stakeholder community. Many business stakeholders may find it difficult to make decisions regarding prioritization as they may see all of the requirements as equal, or at least the requirements they provided. Moreover, you would see that anyone who has provided a requirement, he would always respect it more and prioritize that requirement as higher. Or maybe the stakeholders are not able to justify which is the better requirement and which is not, so they can't prioritize them. Drive the prioritization decisions from the business by using one or more of the following techniques to help support the prioritization activity. And what are those? You might have heard about Moscow. Moscow is M stands for must haves. These are the fundamentals to project success. We must identify those items which we must have in the solution. Then are the should haves. S stands for should haves. These are important, but the project success does not depend on them. So if we have them, it is good, but if we don't, then it will not hamper our project success. Then we have could haves. C stands for could haves. They can easily be left out without impacting the project. So these are the requirements. These are kind of optional. We can't fulfill them. Just forget about them. And won't haves. These are not to be delivered at this time around. Maybe in the next project, maybe sometime later, but we won't have these in our present project. So W stands for won't have. So M, S, C, and W, that makes up Moscow. Second method is multi-voting. There are many forms of multi-voting that are designed to gain active participation from stakeholders. This technique provides a process for participants to apply votes to a list of items to determine an answer based on number of votes received. When using multi-voting for setting priorities, the requirement with the most votes is deemed the higher priority item. Now, how do you do that? As we have already talked about it a bit, multi-voting is like a fast Delphi technique. What we do in it is that we write down all the requirements in front of us. All participants can see those, and then we allocate them a number of votes to each participant. So maybe I say every participant has 10 votes. So they have to vote these to these requirements, which is the highest priority requirement. They will vote for it. They can give any number of votes to our requirement. They can give no vote, they can give one vote, two vote, or all 10 of them. Maybe you decide to give 4 votes to our requirement and 3 votes to another, and another 2 to another, and 1 each to 2 others. So you distribute your 10 votes in this way. Or you may like to have 1 vote given to each to 10 requirements. So if you have got 30 requirements in front of you, you are picking the best out of them from your point of view. So you are distributing these 10 votes among those 30 requirements in whatever number you want, in whatever number of votes to each of the requirements. So when everybody has voted, we will then count the number of stars or votes in front of that requirement, and which requirement has got the highest number of votes is prioritized at the top, and the second highest will come number 2, and so on and so forth. This way we will be able to prioritize our requirements through multi-voting. Hope you understand this example.
Yes, sir, I can understand.
So the example given here is also the same kind. When applying multi-voting to determine a list of prioritized requirements, each stakeholder could be given a set of sticky dots, or you may use stars or whatever, in 3 different colors: red for high priority, blue for middle priority, yellow for low priority, or whatever, with the requirements on a whiteboard or flip chart. Stakeholders place one or more of their sticky notes next to the requirement they believe merits the priority. A participant can place all the red sticky dots next to requirement believed to be the highest. Once all the dots have been placed, the dots are totaled and the requirement prioritized. This game-like atmosphere of this approach makes it easy and fun for stakeholders to prioritize requirements. Then is time boxing. Very popular in Scrum and Agile techniques. Time boxing is a prioritization technique that is used when the project has a fixed timeline and the timeline is not negotiable. Time boxing approaches the prioritization of requirements by analyzing the amount of work the project team is capable of delivering during a prescribed period of time. So if you have got 2 weeks, which is the highest priority job which you want to pick to be done during this 2-week period? The project team determines the scope based on what the work can be completed within the fixed window of time. In 2 weeks, how much can you do? This is included in your scope. If the time box is 90 days, the project team evaluates the list of requirements and determines what can be delivered within that 90-day window. Time boxing is often used with other techniques such as Moscow to ensure that the requirement time boxed into the product release are those the business has selected as the highest priority or highest value. That means before our requirements come to the time box, it must have been prioritized in the product backlog. That means the product backlog has been already prioritized. That's why we call it prioritized backlog. A variation of this technique uses money instead of time. Rather than putting time, how much time it will take, you can fix the amount of money which can be spent in this time. And then you pick those requirements which can fit into that amount instead of time to determine which requirements can be delivered based on a budget. G. J.
Right, sir. In my product management. Okay.
And I did not get
In my product management,
it.
sir, in product management work, we have done this technique of prioritization.
Yes,
All
yes,
right.
yes.
So, after applying the same technique, we have tried to apply the same technique, it was so much time consuming because there were around 8 to 10 stakeholders, and everybody's the priority was different. And later on, as we proceed with other requirements, other features, it was getting change and change.
Mhm.
So how we are going to accommodate such stuff? Is there any tool or is there any better way of doing it?
Okay, number one, at the time when we were studying business analysis, I mean, we were planning for the business analysis, we were not prioritizing. We were fixing the rules for prioritization, right? Now we are doing the prioritization. Number one. Number two, um, as many times the requirements change, the backlog, product backlog, is reprioritized every time. If a new requirement is introduced, that new requirement is put into the order of priority. Naturally, all other requirements are already in order. So if there is one new requirement, you will try to ascertain where does it fit according to the order of priority. You don't have to do the whole prioritization again. You just have to see where this specific requirement fits into the backlog. And then it becomes the reprioritized product backlog. Got it?
That's my question. Basically, being in product development environment,
Hmm.
in my organization, I've been asked to identify features which we need to develop in next 4 months or 6 months.
Right, right.
Okay. So, for example, there was a session with my senior management.
Okay,
I've highlighted there are almost 35 new features should be in place in our product.
okay,
All right. So it was evident that during 6 months of duration, 35 features could not take place.
okay.
So we try to prioritize the features which are most important and up to the market.
Bilkul, right.
Okay. So when we start this activity,
Hmm.
so people said the feature one is most important, it's red, two is yellow, three is red, four is
Okay,
red. Then by the end of the sheet, there were 35 requirements, and most of them were red because it was good to have something, or it was must have something in that. So
okay,
at that point, at the end of that session, I have to schedule another session in which we were reprioritizing all the red columns, and in which we were doing something which we can achieve within 6 months.
okay.
Okay. So is there any smarter way of doing it?
Yeah. You see, were you doing an agile project?
Sir, it's an agile methodology.
Okay,
We are following agile methodology.
okay. If it is an agile methodology, then your sprint cannot be 6 months. That is the total duration of the project. How do you ascertain the total duration of the project?
Sir,
Actually,
basically,
mm,
sorry to interrupt. 6 months is the release.
mhm. Release is after 6 months. So that means you have time boxed the release, and if new requirements are adding, you will use Moscow, and the earlier prioritized list you will see, and many items which were must have might change, and new must have items get into that. So those must haves can become should have, and should have can become can have, and for the 6 months period you will define the must haves. That will be the priority. You got my point? Adil?
Sir, can you suggest me any tool which can help me in prioritization requirements?
I was just telling you the same tools we are studying, they will help you. There can be more tools, but you see, Moscow can help you a lot. The Moscow technique, which I just talked about, initially when you prioritize your requirements, initially you must
Alright,
describe the should have.
sir,
Yes,
sir, I agreed. Basically, by tool, I was referring some UI-based tool, like
okay,
the product mentioned, AHA is a software. So I did the same activity on Excel sheet.
right,
So
right.
I defined its must have, it should have. Is there any online tool, if you have gone through with any such type of analysis?
There can be any online tool created. Weighted matrices, ratings can be done. Time boxing can be done. You can do the Moscow thing, or you can do many other things, multi voting or other. The tools available online are exactly doing the same thing. They are helping do these things, these prioritization schemes, in a digital way. I am not really aware of any such tool, but I know that there are many tools available. Once I was trying it on the mobile applications, and I found a number of tools there. I don't remember their names now, but there are tools available.
Okay, sir.
Right after time boxing, we have got weighted ranking, and that is again a very popular way, and we have already talked about it. That is, you give specific weights to various items, and then you add them up. We had seen a table also of this weighted ranking. Weighted ranking begins in business analysis planning before the possible solution options are selected. Prior to performing weighted ranking, the business analyst facilitates a decision regarding which criteria the decision will be based on. Possible options could be, the functional type of things, what is the efficiency, what is the ease of use, what is the attractiveness, and you give rating according to what is more important to you. If efficiency is more important, you give it double the weighting. Ease of use may be, three times the weightage. Attractiveness could be one times the weightage, and then you average it out, and you are able to do the weighted average. The highest score is assigned to the criteria considered to be the most important, thereby creating a weighted ranking. Weighted ranking is further defined in section 2 of need assessment. We have used it in need assessment, where it is used to rank solution options when we were deciding which of the options we should select for the solution. So the same method is used here for prioritizing the requirements. Then technical requirement specifications. For projects may require more detailed technical documents like software, IT, construction, manufacturing projects, to name a few. The requirements are documented in the format of a technical requirement specification. Technical specifications may contain such elements as wireframes describing the appearance of a user interface. We have already talked about the wireframe. Screen mockups specifying the details of a user interface. Data models and schemas. Detailed process flows such as data flow diagrams and activity diagrams. Detailed requirements that include technical references. You see, when we are repeating the things we have studied, it does not mean that we are doing those things again and again. Actually, if we are doing it here, that is for the technical requirement. When we studied it, that was for another purpose. So the same tool might be used for several things. The collaboration point here is, for IT projects, some organizations have a system analyst who produces the technical specification, dividing the requirements documentation between the business analyst and the IT analyst. The business analyst then produces the business requirement specification, and the system analyst prepares the technical requirements specification. So, from IT point of view, we are well aware of the role of a system analyst, and system analyst is responsible for developing these technical requirement specifications, whereas the business analyst looks after the business requirements specification. In this practice guide, the role of business analyst is referred to in the general sense. Therefore, the role of the system analyst and the business analyst is merged together here. The work to produce the technical requirement specification is included as a possible documentation activity, recognizing that the documents that are produced will be dependent on the selected project life cycle. So we are not talking about the system analyst separately. Whatever the system analyst has to produce a technical requirement, we are considering that to be the responsibility of business analysts for the time being. Now, as you were saying, use cases, documenting with use cases may be used by an organization in addition to a functional requirements specification, are used instead of producing a separate functional requirement specification. A use case may represent one or more functional requirements. Use case may supplement text-based requirements and are developed for areas of the system where the interaction of the system and the user are more complex. Use cases may be used when there are multiple paths and scenarios that the system needs to accommodate. Instead of creating a functional requirement specification, some organizations may decide to use cases and will choose to use models such as those discussed in the practice guide instead of text-based requirements. The decision regarding the preferred documentation approach for project is made in the business analysis planning, which we have already done before, and here are the various methods. Then we will talk about those methods. Documenting with user stories. Again, documenting a user story is sometimes written on an index card. You see, if you remember, a user story is is an independent story, and that is written on a separate piece of card. Every story is written on a separate piece of card, and we have got and these are the requirements. User stories are the requirements. So these are prioritized, all the cards are prioritized and put into the product backlog with the highest priority on top. So writing the story on a card enforces brevity and concision. We will be concise. If we write the story on a card very briefly, that will be concise. It will have to be fit into one card. When cards are not used, maintain the stories in a document, in a spreadsheet or requirement management tool, if you have any. When packaged together, user stories represent a high-level version of solution requirement. User stories are a documentation method for breaking down features into manageable parts and provide a simple and effective mechanism to segment a complex set of features into simple, definable elements. User stories have already been explained earlier in section 4.10.8.3. Backlog items, this is the product backlog we are talking about. The backlog is a prioritized list of product requirements that includes all the user stories, all the deliverables to be completed, often the written stories, and prioritized by the business to manage and organize the project's work. As the use of adaptive project lifecycle has become more prevalent, the concept of building a backlog has gained in popularity and across approaches. So initially the product backlog is just you are writing stories and you are throwing them into a bin, into a basket without any order. So you have got all the stories which you have been writing, place into a basket, and this basket, then you get all the stories out once you have done the story writing. You get all the stories out and then you prioritize them. And then you put them in a stack in order of priority. And as I said before, whenever a new requirement comes or whenever the priority of a requirement changes, you reprioritize these requirements. You add the new requirement wherever it fits, and if a requirement priority is changed, you get it out of the stack and put it at the right place. Where backlogs are commonly leveraged to contain only user stories, the term can be used more broadly as backlogs may contain use cases, it can contain requirements, it can contain defects to be fixed in addition to the user stories. Regardless of the content stored in the product backlog, to ensure clarity, each item should be written with the same care and follow the same guidelines as a requirement expressed in a business requirement document. So it should be precise. In agile approaches, the business analyst is often assigned to help the product owner groom the product backlog. What is grooming the product backlog? It is actually the activity of reprioritizing the product backlog. If new requirements come or requirements change, we already have a prioritized product backlog. We groom it, we fix it, which involves adding and removing backlog items and reprioritizing based on changing business conditions and priorities. Next is validate requirements. Validation is defined as the assurance that a product, service, or system meets the needs of the customer and other identified stakeholders. So they have validated it. But this is not the approval. This is not the approval. This is just the validation. You are showing your results to the stakeholder, and he knows it is okay. He doesn't give you an approval or signature, but he says it looks right. In business analysis, requirements validation is the process of ensuring all requirements accurately reflect the intent of the stakeholder, thereby ensuring the requirements meet their expectations. This confirmation, validation has to be continuous. As you are doing the job, keep the stakeholder involved with you and keep getting his note. Keep confirming continuously that your requirements are fulfilling the stakeholder requirements. Confirmation of requirements can occur whether the requirements are written down in a requirement document or are displayed on a whiteboard in a requirements workshop. Confirmation is not an activity that is performed once at the end of the requirement process. This is a continuous thing. Confirmation occurs whenever the business analyst reviews the information gathered during an elicitation session with the stakeholder or any part of the developing solution is shown to the stakeholder. So whenever and wherever stakeholder interacts with you, you keep getting confirmation, keep getting validation from the stakeholder. He agrees with you, he nods at the solution, then it is okay, it is validated. I am not asking you to get signature from the stakeholder at this stage. When the requirements are broken up into small self-contained units, the review sessions involve fewer participants and take less time. You see, if I am doing a sprint, all the stakeholder may not be involved in this sprint. So the review session will involve fewer participants and take less time. It may also be helpful to divide the requirements document up by functional area and ask stakeholders to confirm the requirement that impact their area. This requires more work, but stakeholders will appreciate being able to focus specifically on their own requirements. There is a risk, however, that the separation of requirements may not be correct, and stakeholders impacted by a group of requirements may not be provided with all of the requirements that will impact them. So that risk is there, and you have to take keen care of that. Then is requirements walkthrough. Requirements walkthrough are used to review the requirements with the stakeholder and to receive confirmation that the requirements as stated are valid. You go through the list of requirements in a meeting with stakeholder and you discuss it with stakeholder how a requirement has been completed or is being completed, and he can comment on that whether he is satisfied or not. Valid requirements accurately reflect what the stakeholders are asking the solution developer to develop. And if you can satisfy him, then you are meeting his expectations. To conduct a requirements walkthrough, the business analyst schedules the session, providing the stakeholder enough time to prepare. Reviewers may be asked to read the material before attending, and by doing so, the reviewers will be able to think about the stated solution ahead of time, better preparing their feedback, avoid providing emotional reactions to the material in the session. There should not be any emotional reactions. It should be sanity prevailing. All discussion must be logic based. Take time to discuss the materials with their organizational units. If they are preparing beforehand, they will be able to discuss with their teams, with their units, with the peers, so that feedback provided is representative of the larger stakeholder group. The flow of information in a review session should come from the reviewer as much as possible. This session is one of the final opportunities for the stakeholder to raise questions, seek clarity, and voice concern. And if he doesn't, then it is said, hold your peace forever. Because then we are in the final sessions, we are about to, approve it. We'll get the final verification and approve it. So it is almost done. So this is the time for the customer to speak up. The business analyst can use this session as an opportunity to field questions and seek to close down any open requirements related issues in preparation for receiving final approval of the requirements. Once you have validated the requirement, then we move on to the verification of the requirement. Now, it might confuse you a bit because the terminology of validation and verification sometimes is confusing. Actually, these two things, verification and validation, although can happen one after the other, but sometimes you can do them simultaneously also. If you can refer back to PMBOK, you would see in 5th edition, it says the deliverables are first verified by quality control and then they are validated by validate scope process. You see, in that case, verifications comes first and validation comes later. As far as the verification is concerned, verification talks about uh, the product, the quality of the product, and validation talks about the scope. So no matter if we have done the validation earlier, we have validated the requirements. So we were talking about the scope of the requirement with a stakeholder and we have agreed with it. But the approval process, the sign off, is a separate activity. Anyways, when we are verifying the requirements, it is not only from the stakeholder, we are actually verifying the requirement from the technical experts also, if it is technically sound and if the solution is okay or not. Verification is the process of reviewing the requirement for errors and quality. As I said, quality. Verification is for quality. Verification may occur before or after validation. It is not necessary that verification should occur after validation. It can occur with validation or before validation. Verifying requirements after they have been validated or confirmed by the product stakeholder ensures that only those requirements that are considered to be good are being verified. So we are not wasting any quality time on verifying those requirements which are not validated. So this is one logic provided here, that validation will cut short the requirements which are not to be verified. Validation is concerned about ensuring that the requirements solve the problem, whereas verification is not. Verification is performed by members of the solution team, not the stakeholder, to ensure that the requirements meet the quality standards or any other business analysis deliverable in the process meets the standards of excellence for the organization. There are two types of verification processes: peer reviews and inspections. Peer reviews can be conducted at any point in time during the requirement process. In business analysis, a peer review is a formal or informal review of the requirements by the peers of the business analyst. Beside business analysts may include other practitioners such as their manager or someone in the business analysis center of excellence. Quality assurance or testing resources also make great reviewers. The purpose of the peer review is to ensure that the written business analysis deliverables, including all forms of requirement documentation, are in compliance with the organizational standards and generally held principles of requirements writing. Section 4.11.4 contain examples of these guidelines. We just discussed the requirements writing in the last lecture. This helps to ensure there are no glaring errors in the requirements that could cause problems during the review. Peer reviews may also be held after the review sessions with the business stakeholders to ensure the final document is understood and accepted by the solution team and development community in general. Conducting a peer review is fairly straightforward. All reviewers are provided with a copy of the document and asked to review the document prior to attending the peer review session, and then they can come up with their arguments. The requirements are reviewed as a group with each reviewer pointing out issues or problems in the document. A form of screen sharing technology can be used to display the document and make changes to it during the meeting as issues are discussed, thereby saving time and ensuring the error raised are properly fixed. So, on the go, you can fix the changes. As they are being discussed, one person should display them and correct them right on screen. When a formal session is not conducted, the document can be distributed to the peer review team electronically, asking the reviewers to track their changes in the original document. So they can do the document tracking, they can make the amendments to the document, and those will be later seen by the person who is compiling them. For organizations who use a requirement management tool, there are a number of features that can be used to track the comments provided by document reviewers. Collaboration points here: ask testers and those involved in developing training manuals to be part of the verification review. This provides these team members with a project background and context early on. Even before they have started working, they will have a good understanding of what this job is all about. Can you hear me? Okay. These team members will focus on the details and check for consistency, completeness, and testability of the requirements, which is beneficial for the verification review. Then is inspection. Inspections are more rigorous form of a peer review. Inspections were initially targeted for hardware development and were later modified to be applicable for anything that needs to be reviewed for accuracy, completeness, and relevance, etc. So, where do we conduct inspections? We conduct inspections either in validation or verification, but here we are talking about verify requirements. So, these inspections are being carried out for the purpose of verifying the requirements. In a predictive life cycle, requirements inspections are typically performed once at the end of the requirement process, when the document is ready for final approval. Often inspections are performed after all of the business stakeholders have had a chance to review and confirm their respective portion of the requirements. The objective is for the business to ensure that the requirements are acceptable in their current form. Inspections can also be performed on groupings or chunks of completed requirements. The inspection is performed by peers who participated in the creation of documentation of the requirements and are recipients of the requirement document. Business stakeholders and management are excluded from an inspection session, especially the line management of the inspectors. So the functional people have nothing to do with inspection. This is more of a technical job. The requirement inspection checklist could include the following items. For example, are all internal cross references to other requirements correct? Are all requirements written at a consistent and appropriate level of detail? It should not happen that one requirement is written very sketchy and another requirement is too detailed. The level of detail for all requirements should remain consistent and appropriate. Appropriate means do not describe anything more than required or less than required. Just appropriately describe, and describe all the requirements to the same level of detail. Do the requirements provide an adequate basis for design? Can you, if you remember in elicitation and analysis, we said we will keep asking questions until and unless the solution is visible to us. So it should adequately, point to a solution. It can become the basis for design. Is the implementation priority for each requirement included? When each requirement is going to be implemented, do you have them prioritized? Are all external hardware, software, and communication interfaces defined? In the environment you are going to interact, you must define all the external entities, how they are going to interact with you. Have algorithms intrinsic to the functional requirements been defined? Is the expected behavior documented for all anticipated error conditions? A checklist differentiates an inspection from a peer review. In a peer review, there is no checklist. In inspection, you take along a checklist and you keep ticking the points which are fulfilled. A peer review depends on the knowledge of the reviewer, whereas an inspection uses a checklist of known defects for the product being inspected. Inspections also follow a more rigorous process than peer reviews and use a series of rules to govern how they are performed. Now, once we have validated and verified the requirements, that means there is nothing left, and we are now at a stage for the approval. So, approval sessions are conducted separately from confirmation sessions. After the solution is confirmed and validated, the business analyst obtains sign off on the requirements. Sign off may be formal or not and may be predetermined in business analysis plan. When signatures are sought, there are three signatures